Hi everybody, in this video we're going to be talking about lesson 1.2, which covers increasing and decreasing intervals and maximum and minimum points. Let's go ahead and get started. So one thing is just to note that this is where I got the information from this lesson. This website, coolmath.com, you all are probably familiar with from playing games, but it has a lot more than games on it. And so this is where I'm getting this from. These are the four main things we're going to talk about in this lesson: x-intercept, y-intercept, relative max, and relative min. You already know how to find the intercepts. That's not new to you. So to move on to the relative max and relative min, I'm going to look at another example. We will come back to this page, and for this piece of it, I just want you to look at what I'm talking about and try to think about and make sense of it. So this is data that came from Johnson County, just came from August 16th, 2021, and we are looking at a pandemic, and so this is the moving average. That black line is the moving average. They put these lines in, the vertical lines in, to record how many cases there are, but then they average it to make it a little bit more smooth, because if you just looked at all of this with all these vertical lines in it, it would look a little confusing. So they average it. Okay, if I look at this data, notice that the y-axis is how many new cases we have. The x-axis is the date. So there are some questions down here, and we're going to get to those questions later. But right now I want to focus on those two terms I was talking about a minute ago. That is relative max and relative min. When we say relative max or relative min, we're talking about just like relative to the other stuff. So honestly, these are typically bumps. And so we're just looking for where is there a bump, and the top of that bump or the bottom of that bump. I'm using the words relative max and relative min. Another term is local max or local min, and that would mean just like in the neighborhood. Okay, so if I look at some max and min points, I could say, okay, where's a relative max? Well, this one's relatively high. That's a relative max. And maybe this one's a relative max. And these two are like kind of the absolute max. So I think we can have a discussion on should we include those or not. I'm going to, for now, not, because I think those are the absolute maxes. But that might be a relative max, and this might be a relative max. So you just see it's the top of a bump. And so if I said, what is the relative max? And maybe I'll outline my area. I'll say, okay, let's just look, and they have dates down here at the bottom. We talked about that. Let's just look from January to March. From January to March, where is there a relative max? And you'd say, well, it's right here. How high is it? Well, I don't know. I'm looking over here, and it's maybe about 325, or about that, about 325 cases. Okay, that's one of the relative max points. And what if I said, okay, well, how about from the fall, like August through October, or November? You'd say, well, there's a relative max here. And I'd say, okay, where is that? You'd say, well, it's at about maybe at the beginning of September. And I'd say, well, how high is it? And you'd say it's about 100 cases. So maybe that's another relative max right there. All right, so my point is, when we talk about these relative max and relative min, we actually answer two questions. We ask, where is it? And we also ask, how high or how low? So those are relative max points. And we can look at the relative min as well. Like, where's there a relative min? Well, maybe that's a relative min. Maybe that's a relative min. This is definitely a relative min. That's a relative min. And so, again, we can ask, where is it? And we can ask, how high or how low is it? And so I might say, well, is there one, for instance, in the winter? That is from November to October. You'd say, well, there's definitely one here, yeah. And so I could ask you, where is it? And you'd say it's maybe December. Let me get a real pen this time. So if I'm talking about this point right here, I could say it's in December. And I could say, well, how high is it, or how low is it? You'd say, well, it got down to about 300 cases. Okay, these two questions, where is it and how high is it? Where is asking where on the x-axis is it? How high or how low is asking where on the y-axis is it, right? Because like this point, for instance, it was right about here, December 1st, and it's right about here, 300 cases. All right, let's go back to our notes. So if we look at this graph, now the difference is we don't have the labels. We don't have number of cases or years or whatever. They're just numbers because that's what math is. The other one was more like social studies or science, and this one's more like math. So the tops are the relative max, the high points in their neighborhood. The relative extrema, which means max and mins, we don't care about that word so much. Sometimes we're called local max or min, and we talked about that. Other than just pointing these out on the graph, we have a very specific way to write them out. Officially, we would say if this graph is called F, so notice there's an F here. So this graph is called F. We could say F has a relative max of 2 at x equals negative 3. Okay, where is it? X equals negative 3. How high is it? It's at 2. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Next question, or next sentence, very similar. F has a relative max of 1 at x equals 2. Where is it? It's at 2. How high is it? Up to 1. Okay, so we're answering 2 questions. Here's another example that has words, labels. So here we have time and distance, and we have this person walking. That's what this graph is notating, maybe walking, running, really running, and standing still. What is the maximum distance from home? How far away did this person get from home? I'd say this is the max that they ever got away from home. That's 160 meters. I should have a lowercase m there. There's another one here, though, at 100 meters. At point E, the relative max is 100 meters. That's how far away they got. That's the maximum value. So for the graph above, the relative max would be 2. Oh, sorry, up here. For the graph above, the relative max would be 2, not 3, 2. So if I asked what's the relative max, you'd say 2. That's how high I got. I didn't ask you where it was. I said, what's the max? All right, let's turn the page. Relative min, same thing. That's at the bottom. And so again, we can look at a couple of different examples. Here's a minimum point, and here's a minimum point. Has a relative min of negative 3. How low did it get? It got down to negative 3. Where? At 1, or excuse me, negative 1. What's another one? Well, over here it got down to negative 1. Where was it? It was at x equals 4. So the answer is really how high or how low. The x is not as important. Okay, that is relative min and relative max. Let's move on to the next concept, which is increasing and decreasing intervals. And again, I'm going to go back to the graph we were looking at a minute ago with the COVID information. If I look at this and I ask you, where is the graph increasing? I think you would know. Wouldn't you say that like one place is here, another place maybe is here, and then all these little ones, maybe we can highlight one of these, and for instance, maybe this right here. Okay, that's where it's increasing. If you were going to write out an answer for that, what would you call that? It's hard to know because of their dates on here. They're only counting every 2 months. But let's just take a look. Let's say maybe about, I don't know, June 15th, just to estimate. So we could say June 15th to, maybe July 15th. Okay, I'm just having to approximate because it's hard to see exactly where that is. And if we came over here, we could say maybe just before Halloween, so October 30th maybe, until here. And my lines aren't totally straight, I know. And that's halfway between, so maybe that's December 1st. I think that would make sense to you, right? It's increasing in those places. When I asked, where is it increasing? Did I ask you how many cases it had? No, I didn't. So, yes, you could figure out how many cases there were, about 100 new cases there, whereas here was, I don't know, about 5. I'm just, again, estimating. But that wasn't even relevant. I didn't ask you about that, did I? All I asked was, where is it increasing? And I think most of us, when we answer that question, we automatically go and we look on the x-axis and we look to see what is happening on the x-axis when I ask that question. So from here to here, maybe here to here, and maybe here to here, right? When I ask a question in math of where is it increasing, you're going to give your answer for the x-axis, okay? Same thing with where is it decreasing. So where is it decreasing? You go, well, it kind of went down a little bit here, and a little bit here, and it definitely went down here. It was like the golden days, right? We were all home, right? It's January through February. Everyone's stuck inside. So yes, it was decreasing during those times. And I guess we also started to get vaccinations right about here. So it continued to decrease. Okay, so if I said, well, where is that? You'd say, well, I don't know. We said that was like July 15th. So maybe July 15th through end of August. And then maybe beginning of September to middle of October, right? So I'm just like picking where on the x-axis, where does it describe the fact that it's going down? And if I ask you where it's constant, would you know what I mean by that? By where it's constant, I'm talking about basically flat. And this is where it was about flat. And again, back to vaccines, this is about where people got their vaccinations. And so it was kind of flat here. That means it was constant. It stayed right at, I don't know, 10 cases, 50 cases, I can't tell, I don't know. But if you described this flat place, where would you say that it is? Well, you'd say it's from, I don't know, middle of March through middle of, or maybe June 1st. So where is it constant? We'll say March 15th through June 1st. But again, notice when I describe it, I'm using the x-axis, right? All right, let's go back to our notes. All right, back to our notes. When they talk about this on Cool Math, they use this little ant Pierre. Pierre is the mountain climbing ant. He's climbing uphill, he's climbing downhill, or he's going flat. And in fact, let's take a second to talk about that flat for just a minute. What they describe, and I would agree, that when Pierre is right here on the very top, isn't Pierre going to be flat? Same thing down here. When Pierre is right there, isn't Pierre going to be flat? And so that is important to note because it's going to determine whether we use square brackets or regular parentheses. And what they're saying is that Pierre is going up, 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 but then never quite gets there to going up. When he gets there, he's actually flat, and so we're going to use parentheses. All right, let's go ahead and get started on Pierre. So our graph, if we look at this graph here, our graph, where is it increasing? That is, where is Pierre climbing up? Well, we always start from the left and move to the right. So again, we're asking where, like the time we were talking about, like the months, okay? So we're asking where is he going up? Well, he's going up all the way from negative infinity all the way until he gets to negative 3. And we never include negative infinity because you never get there. And the negative 3, that's what I was talking about. It's flat there. So you never include that either because that's flat. That's not going up, it's flat. And then remember the U means and. And so where else is it going up? Well, Pierre from 1 all the way to 4 is also going to be going up. And once again, at 4, I think you could argue it, but I'm going to say that at 4, Pierre is flat. And so we're not going to include 4 and we're not going to include 1. But what we're talking about is the x value, like from here to here. Because when we look at a graph, we look at it left to right. And so from here all the way to here, he's going up. And from here all the way to here, he's going up. And the x values. All right, there are some information here that you should pay attention to. and then we're going to turn the page. All right, downhill, similar deal. From here to here, Pierre is going downhill, and I don't see any other downhill. Again, we always go from left to right, so I don't see any other downhills. So from that area, I'm saying from -3 all the way until 1, Pierre is going downhill, and it's flat on the end, so that's not downhill, so we use the parentheses. Notice I'm using parentheses, not brackets. Okay, I would say try this on your own. See how it says try it? We're going to try it. So I would say pause the video here, try to do the intervals, see what you come up with, and then when you're ready, start it up again, and we'll see how you did. All right, I tried to color code mine for you. The increasing intervals I did in pink up here, and then I gave you the answers down here. The decreasing intervals, I went to green. Remember, we use the X values, and we always go from left to right. So left to right, and X values. Okay. The ones that I didn't talk about were the flat parts, and those are the constant parts. We ought to recognize those as well, but we're just, for this lesson, mainly talking about increasing and decreasing. All right, that is the end of the video. Remember to always write down some things you need to remember. So go ahead and think of, what do I need to remember? To me, those things right there are pretty darn important, but there will be things throughout that you want to write down of what is important. Also remember that if you have any questions, then write your questions in the margin, wherever they came from. And so when I come to class tomorrow, or you come to class tomorrow, you can ask me. So you might say, well, Mrs. Reed, in concept 1, why did you blah, blah, blah? Because you've got a question here. Okay, so if you write it down right next to where it is, then when you come to class, you can know what your question was. All right, write those questions in there, write down the things that you learned, and come to class next time, and we'll talk about it. See you later.